Today, we celebrate a scandalous thing, a shocking thing, an embarrassing thing. An embarrassing thing. The baptism of Jesus by John at the River Jordan was challenging, shocking, embarrassing for his followers. It was difficult to explain from a power perspective, which is a way we tend to see a lot of things, from a power perspective. If Jesus was truly the anointed one, isn't it a bit demeaning to have him baptized by a crazy-looking dude out in the desert? That's not how it's supposed to work. That's the reverse of how power is supposed to work. So that was a problem. It was difficult to explain from a theological perspective. If Jesus was like us, but without sin, why did he need to have his sins washed away in baptism at the River Jordan? His baptism should have been unnecessary, and it was kind of scandalous and shocking to have it done by an inferior. It is truly shocking, embarrassing, difficult to explain. The baptism of Jesus is, in fact, so shocking and so difficult to explain that it is one of the things we can be absolutely historically sure actually happened to and by Jesus during his life. Let me explain. If something in a text that is either a historical text or a text that talks about history, if something in that text is difficult, shocking, embarrassing for the author of the text to tell you about, well, then you can be pretty much sure that if that person told you about it, it was probably true. They were stuck. They had to tell you this shocking, embarrassing thing because everybody knew that it had happened. The baptism of Jesus was very challenging to the writers of the New Testament. Matthew makes that very clear when he has John the Baptist say, "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" And Matthew explains this by having Jesus say, "It is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness." For the author of the Gospel of Matthew, righteousness meant conforming to the will of God. And it's a very important theme in the Gospel of Matthew. And so it was his way of explaining that Jesus, our model, conforms to the will of God. The very first gospel that was written is actually the Gospel of Mark. And Mark actually tells the story very simply. There's not a whole lot of explaining, there's not a whole lot of objecting. Jesus just goes, he's baptized, the dove descends, God says God's words, and it's done. Just a decade or so later, when the Gospel of Matthew is written, it seems like they feel there is some explaining that needs to be done. It's shocking, difficult, and embarrassing to explain. Well, let me tell you what is really shocking, what really makes you think. God will stop at nothing to reach us. Nothing at all. God will stop at nothing to reach us. If it takes being humble, joining with us, God will do it. God who created the heaven and the earth. God who called for the waters of the sea and poured them out on the surface of the earth. God who hung the stars in the sky. That God. That God. That God will also come to us in all humility. As a helpless baby in a manger. As a person coming to the waters of baptism. God will reach out to us in the most humble of ways. God will stop at nothing to reach us. Nothing at all. And God will beat us over the heads if need be. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my son, the beloved," this is how I imagine it, "with whom I am well pleased." God will beat us over the heads to reach us. It doesn't happen all that often. Sometimes I wish God would beat me or someone else over the heads a little more often. And we kind of see this over the arc of the life of Jesus. We get this kind of revealing here in Epiphany at Jesus' baptism. We hear about it again during the Transfiguration, which is the gospel story we will hear at the end of Epiphany. And we get it again when Jesus rises from the dead. We get that beating us over the head bit. But in between, there's a lot of people who are just being moved by Jesus, by his love, his care, his preaching, his humility. And I think we mostly hear God's still small voice, a voice of humility, a voice that reaches our humanity. But let's not forget, let's not rule out that God is not above being, godlike, laying it down, preaching from on high, grabbing us and shaking us and showing us that God will stop at nothing to reach us. Nothing at all. The world is a little bit all over the place right now. It's the best way as I reflected on what's going on. We have one court that said that all people, including gay and lesbian people, have a right to get married in Utah. Then another court told Utah to hang on. Some people are happy about this. Some are sad. Some are confused. Some don't know what to think. Our federal government is the most dysfunctional I have ever seen it in my life. And the fighting there tends to spread out into the rest of culture. As a people, we seem more divided than ever. We can't seem to figure out how to live together. What's the best way to help each other? What's the best way to make sure everybody gets health care? Or the best way to make sure that everybody has jobs and a good life? And these are just a few of the big, difficult questions that we struggle with as a society. And I bet that each and every one of you, like me, struggles with personal questions that are no less important. And you do it every single day. And I wish that I could tell you that there were easy answers. And I'm sorry to say that the Bible and our religion, in fact, don't even give us easy answers. And in my opinion, God never promises us easy answers. But in Christ, we know that God will stop at nothing to reach us. Nothing at all. To touch our minds and hearts, to be there for us, to answer our prayers. God will stop at nothing to reach us. In baptism, Jesus joins us. God sometimes, perhaps most often, is with us humbly, in humility. But God will also beat us over the head if we need it. God is always there, reaching for us in the confusion. And our job is to know that, and accept it, and to live into it. Our job is to do the hard work of searching for God's call to us in every situation. And we do this in lots of ways. We do it by praying. We do it by studying the Bible. We do it when we learn from each other. We do it by being shaped by worship. We do it by listening to God, but also listening honestly and lovingly to each other here in our church and out there in the world, and especially perhaps listening to the ones that shock us, that embarrass us, that maybe we disagree with. And we do this by living into our own baptism and the covenant that it calls us to. The covenant that we are going to repeat shortly. In baptism, Jesus joins with us. When we are baptized, we join with Jesus. Jesus' disciples were embarrassed by his baptism. We do not need to be. The only embarrassment would be making the easy mistake of assuming that God is silent, that God isn't speaking, that God is not involved, that we cannot seek God. That would be the only embarrassment. And that's an embarrassing mistake, because God will stop and nothing to reach us. Nothing.